debate. The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As always, it's a great honour to rise in this House and represent the members of Timmins, James Bay, and I'm honoured to rise following my colleague from Vancouver East, who has done so much work on the issues of healthcare and end-of-life issues. And I've been meeting across the country with people who are very concerned about the need for a national palliative care strategy. And I was just meeting in Toronto with medical doctors, nurses, people involved in the palliative care movement, and there is a real deep concern following the Supreme Court decision and what it will mean for families and for medical practitioners. These are very deep issues that we need to deal with. And I think the concern is the idea of a vacuum, that the lack of leadership from Parliament to define these issues will put the medical community very much in a compromised position where they don't want to be. And so it is incumbent upon us to address this.
First, I would like to thank the province of Quebec for its consultation process, which was fair, balanced, and the government of the time carried out this fair process in collaboration among all the parties. And that allowed it to establish a plan for all of the province for end-of-life care, and also to define the process regarding the problem of euthanasia. It is possible to find a solution to the problem, and in Quebec they did so.
What concerns me now is that the government knew the Carter decision was coming. The people in the end-of-life care movement knew movement was happening. I heard this all the time. What is the government going to do? Because it's about, Mr. Speaker, in court you have to mitigate your damages. You have to be able to show to the court that you're taking action. If you do not take action, the court will act for you. I think what came out of the Carter decision was this unanimous decision that has very much, rather than actually define this issue, has opened it up in a way that would probably be much broader, certainly broader than Quebec had gone, probably much broader than Parliament would have gone. And if we do not act in response, the courts will be expected to intervene again. There will be other challenges, and we will, as a society, be put in a position dealing with who knows where we will end up in this process. So it is incumbent upon us to deal with this. I think the frustration also, Mr. Speaker, is that Parliament had the chance to act. We established in this House a commitment to a national palliative care and end-of-life strategy to work in consultation with the provinces, recognizing their jurisdiction, to work with the territories, to work with the medical community, because there are models of good quality palliative care out there. And when Canadians know what's available, many of these fears about end-of-life become very different. But the reality is that across this country, it's a patchwork of services. 70% of Canadians do not have access to quality palliative care. And so this other issue, the issue of assisted suicide, certainly, and euthanasia become very draw a lot of attention in the media. So my concern with my Conservative colleagues, if they do not act within this year, where we're going on this issue could be made much broader and much more difficult for parliamentarians to respond to. So we have an opportunity. I think I listened to my honourable members from the Liberal Party, and I agree with them. Parliament can act, and Parliament should act. And a year, well, we knew this was coming. We can do this. My concern with the Liberal motion is that it is focused strictly on the Supreme Court ruling and not on the larger end-of-life issues that have to be part of the package. Because, as they're saying, Harvey Max Chochinov, who just wrote an excellent op-ed on this, he's an expert on palliative care, he's concerned that they will define through this, through Parliament or through the courts, the right to die, but not the right to have access to quality palliative care. It would be a very unjust situation that we simply respond to the court ruling, which may affect 0.2% of the population. I'm not diminishing those people, but that's when 90% of the 70% of the population do not have access to quality end-of-life care. So we have an opportunity right now, Mr. Speaker. The Supreme Court has ruled that this has to be dealt with. So let's put aside the usual bickering that goes on, we have a period where we could sit down and look at how to do this in a way that's just, that works with the provinces and realizes, Mr. Speaker, with the vast majority of our population aging, the issue of palliative and home care and hospice care is vitally important. It's also, from a jurisdictional issue and from a planning issue, very, very important. 1% of the Canadian people use 30% of the health care budget. Many, many, many of those in that 1% are people in their final moments, their final months of life. So we are spending enormous amounts of money on end-of-life care, but when it's being delivered in a patchwork services, the stress on patients is enormous. The stress on families can be traumatic. And certainly the stress on the medical system. If you talk to anybody involved in quality palliative care, and they tell you once you're identified in a palliative program, that you're not dealing with those midnight trips to the emergency ward with a loved one, trying to find a bed, not knowing what to do, the incredible stress that it takes on families. Where we see really good models, I've seen them in Brantford, I've seen them in Sudbury, I've seen them in Saskatoon. Those models can be replicated in other parts of the country. So I'm very, very concerned, Mr. Speaker, that we're standing between a political vacuum on one hand and on the other a committee motion, and I commend my colleagues for bringing it forward, but if in that motion it's not saying that we're addressing the issue of palliative care, then I have a problem. I have a problem saying that we're simply going to address the Supreme Court and we're going to walk away on the rest of it. That is problematic, I think, for Canadian society. And I would also, Mr. Speaker, say that some of my colleagues have said from other parties, the Canadian public are out on this issue. They expect us to show leadership on us. They expect us to show a level of maturity, to recognize that as parliamentarians we are entrusted with certain things. If we do not live up to that standard, the Supreme Court will act for us. And I believe that the Supreme Court has a very fundamental role to play. But they have told Parliament, get your act together, do it within the course of this year, or this will be devolved either to the provinces or we will see further court challenges. And once the courts recognize that if Parliament's not willing to act, I think they will start to interpret this ruling in a much broader fashion, and I'm not sure that that's where the Canadian public will want us to go. So we have an opportunity right now, Mr. Speaker. It's an important opportunity to get the issues of end-of-life care. We stood up in this House just 5 months ago. We talked about palliative care. We committed to it, and since then there's been zero action from the federal government. How does that look when the Supreme Court looks on this issue and says the federal government has done nothing on this? We have an opportunity. The federal government is mandated by Parliament to start that process with the provinces and the territories to establish quality palliative care. The federal government also has a massive role to play in the delivery of health care in terms of First Nation communities who have very, very, very little access to quality palliative care. In the military, with our veterans, in the prisons, and also the federal government has a national role to play in health care to say that we can establish funding that the provinces can access for training. One of the big concerns that's been raised in the palliative care community, Mr. Speaker, is that if this moves within a year, the decisions on life and death will be handed over to general practitioners who do not have the expertise in palliative issues and end-of-life issues. And so we're going to be having to deal with very, very complex issues, again, in a vacuum, without the support. The federal government could work with the provinces and establish those norms, establish those standards, establish training, so that we can do this in a just way, and we can do this in a fair way, and we can do this in a way that all Canadians will recognize, regardless of their beliefs on this issue, because we all share very complicated beliefs, that the quality of each citizen, regardless of their station in life, as they are facing their final few months, the quality of that life has to be considered a total value that we as Canadians and parliamentarians are willing to embrace. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.